The smell of roasting meat had barely begun to waft through the air when she appeared, huffing angrily and holding something around her waist. "End this mess now," she said, and I laughed, thinking it was just another chirp. But then she pulled out a gun. Yes, because of a barbecue. The crazy neighbor really was willing to do anything to ruin my day. Having a barbecue in the backyard was never a problem. That is, at least until she moved in next door. At first, she seemed like just another annoying neighbor, the kind who complains about the sound of swaying leaves and frowns when you say good morning. But I never imagined that the woman would go so far as to pull out a gun because she didn't like the smell of roast beef. Yes, that really happened. The trouble started a few weeks ago. I've always liked to get a few friends together at weekends, fire up the barbecue and enjoy the day. Nothing excessive, just a quiet barbecue, a few laughs, and a cold beer. But apparently, my neighbor had a serious problem with this. The first sign came in a subtle way. At the first barbecue after she moved in, I noticed a cross look coming from the yard next door. One of those looks from someone who has already decided they hate you, but doesn't want to verbalize it yet. I ignored it. At the next barbecue, she decided to be more direct. She opened the door, walked over to the fence, and, without even introducing herself, burst in, "That smell of meat is invading my house." I laughed, thinking it was just a joke. "It's called a barbecue, neighbor. Welcome to the neighborhood." She didn't think it was funny. "I need you to stop that. It's disgusting." The answer was simple. No. Her face turned red with anger, but she held back. She huffed, turned around and went into the house, slamming the door. I thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't. She started a war plan. The following week, she made a point of calling the Residents Association. She claimed that I was polluting the environment, that the smell of the meat affected her health, and that it was not appropriate for a respectful neighborhood. The problem? The association didn't care. Because, you see, I wasn't doing anything wrong. My barbecue was in my backyard. I respected the hours. I didn't make excessive noise. It was just another normal day for any normal person. Except she wasn't normal. That day, on the third barbecue since she moved in, the woman decided she was going to do it her way. I was at the grill, turning a piece of juicy picanha, when I heard fast footsteps approaching. Before I could turn around, she was standing there, arms crossed, looking at me as if I had committed a heinous crime. But this time, there was something different. There was a bulge in the waistband of her pants. Not a cell phone, not a key ring, something much more worrying. She didn't scream. She didn't stomp her foot. She just looked at me and said, with the frightening calm of someone who has lost all sense of reality, "Finish that barbecue now." I laughed. I thought it was another one of her outbursts. But then she pulled out the gun. At that moment, everything stopped. The sound of the meat sizzling on the grill seemed to disappear, and all I could focus on was the black, metallic object pointed in my direction. My friends saw it too. No one moved. This woman really was threatening my life. Over a barbecue, I could have freaked out. I could have panicked. But instead, I did something much more efficient. I just raised my finger and pointed upwards. Her gaze followed my gesture. And then she realized. The security camera in my house was filming everything. Time seemed to freeze. The woman was still holding the gun, but now her expression had changed. Before it was pure arrogance. Now it was panic. The reason? My home security camera was recording every second of that scene. When she looked into the lens and realized that the only thing she had achieved with that stupid threat was to create solid evidence against herself, her fingers fluttered around the handle of the gun. For the first time, she realized that perhaps she had overreacted a little. But the problem is that these types of people never back down with dignity. Instead of lowering the gun, apologizing and trying to get out of there without further damage, she doubled down. "Do you think that's going to stop me?" Her voice shook a little, but she tried to hold her pose. "I have rights. Now, let's be honest. When a person pulls out a gun over barbecue and still talks about rights, You know their brain has already been replaced by a block of moldy cheese. My friend next to me let out a nasal laugh, completely incredulous. This woman is crazy, and that's exactly what it was. She was out of her mind, but I wasn't. I stayed calm, raised my hands slowly, and took a step back, as if I were giving in. That's good. You win. I'll put out the barbecue. She snorted, satisfied. That's all I wanted. But while I was grabbing the tongs to remove the meat from the grill, my friend had his cell phone in his hand, dialing 911. And, with a calm and precise request, he said, "Hello, yes. I'd like to report a woman pointing a gun at us." What happened next was worthy of a movie. The neighbor was still standing there taking deep breaths, trying to pretend she hadn't committed a very serious crime in front of a camera. But her mask fell completely when she heard the distant sound of sirens. And it was at that moment that reality hit hard. She opened her eyes wide and looked around, as if trying to decide whether to run or stay there and pretend that nothing had happened. But whatever choice she made, it was too late. In less than 3 minutes, 2 cars pulled up in the street, lights flashing as if it were Christmas. The scene was priceless. My friends and I on one side, holding beers and meat, and the neighbor on the other, holding a gun that now seemed much heavier in her hands. The police came down quickly, and then she freaked out. "This barbecue is illegal," she shouted, as if this was her last defense. I don't know what was funnier, the fact that she really thought this excuse would work, or the fact that the policeman leading the approach was holding a cup of coffee and a sandwich of meat. He looked at her, then at me. "Is there a beef about roast beef?" I took a deep breath and pointed at the gun still in her hand. She got it, because she didn't like the smell. The policeman's reaction was pure disgust. He put the coffee on the hood of the car, scratched the back of his head, and then looked directly at her. "Ma'am, put the gun down. Now!" The woman froze, and then she started doing what every Karen does when she knows she's lost, trying to become a victim. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, trying to force an innocent expression. "I just wanted him to respect the neighborhood rules." The policeman frowned. "And you think the rule is to pull out a gun over a barbecue?" Her silence was brutal. But it was no longer a question of argument, because the police were already surrounding her. "Ma'am, last time, put the gun down, slowly, and raise your hands." You could see the muscles in her face clenching. She didn't want to give in, but she also knew that if she tried to do anything else, she'd screw herself over even more. After a few seconds that seemed like hours, she dropped the gun to the ground. And so, with the whole neighborhood watching, she was handcuffed right there, next to the grill she hated so much. But the best part? That still wasn't the end of the humiliation, because now she would have to explain herself. If one day someone had told me that a simple backyard barbecue would get my neighbor arrested, I would have laughed. But there she was, handcuffed, surrounded by police officers, and completely screwed. And look, she knew it. After she dropped the gun on the ground, her expression changed completely. Before, it was full of arrogance. Now, pure panic. Because, you see, pulling out a gun in a neighborhood fight isn't just some bullshit. It wasn't something she could simply resolve with an apology and move on. She had committed a serious crime. And what's worse, she did it in front of a security camera and at least 5 witnesses. The police officer who handcuffed her sighed, with the tired look of someone who was already seeing shit go even more wrong. "Ma'am, you are being arrested for threatening with a firearm and endangering the safety of others." She widened her eyes. "What? You pointed a gun at a group of people because you didn't like the smell of roast beef?" He shrugged. "Now you'll have to explain it properly at the police station." She started struggling, trying to get out of the handcuffs. "I didn't do anything!" "Ma'am," the policeman held her firmly. "We have everything on tape." And that was the end of the theater. She knew there was no way out of this. The police took her to the car, while the neighbors, who had already come out of their houses to see the shack, were just popping popcorn. You could hear whispers and giggles. It was public humiliation in real time. But the best was yet to come. Her husband showed up. "What the hell is going on?" He came running, wearing slippers and a robe, clearly not understanding anything. A policeman went up to him and calmly explained the situation. Meanwhile, I just watched from afar, holding my beer, because I knew this was one of those scenes you never see twice in your life. The man was in shock. He looked at his wife, who was on her knees inside the car. Then he looked at me. She threatened you over barbecue?" I shrugged and took a sip of my beer. "I guess she did." You could see the desperation on his face, because, unlike her, he knew the weight of what had just happened. And that's when he asked what no one expected. "What about the meat? Is it good?" The neighbors burst into laughter. The policeman couldn't hold back a chuckle. But his wife? He shrank into the seat of the car as if he wanted to disappear. Because now, not only was she legally screwed, she had also become a joke in her own street. After talking to her husband, the police got into the car and drove off with her to the police station. It was then that I realized something important. The barbecue was still going. In other words, the party wasn't over. And I wasn't going to waste meat just because some crazy person went crazy. I looked at my friends, I looked at the neighbors who were watching, and I shrugged. Well, I guess we can continue in peace now. And that's exactly what we did. But the best part was yet to come. Because while I was enjoying a juicy piece of picanha, her husband's phone rang. And from the look on his face when he answered, I knew that the police station wasn't being kind to her. The woman thought she was going to get away with it. She did. But the moment the car took her away, the party not only continued, it got even better. Because, you see, when someone is arrested, they usually have a plan. A phone call to a lawyer, a relative with influence, anything to ease the situation. But the neighbor didn't think of that before pulling out a gun over a barbecue. And what's worse, her husband was pissed. After the car left, he was still standing there in the middle of the street, holding his cell phone as if deciding whether to help his wife or let her rot in jail for sheer stupidity. The party went on as normal. And, to my surprise, her own husband stayed. Not because he wanted to celebrate his wife's imprisonment, or maybe he did, but because he didn't want to face the shame alone in the house. So, as the smell of meat took to the air again, he sat in a chair and had a beer as if he hadn't just witnessed his wife being taken away for a stupid crime. It wasn't until 9 o'clock that his phone rang. And then it got good. The silence was absolute when he answered. We all knew who it was. Hello? A pause. Then he sighed so loudly that he seemed to have aged 10 years. Yes, I know. Yes, I saw. Another pause. He closed his eyes as if he was trying to find the patience not to hang up on her. You pulled a gun over a barbecue, you crazy woman. His shout echoed through the yard. Some neighbors burst into laughter. Others clapped their hands. Because, finally, someone was saying what everyone was thinking. After about 2 minutes of a one-sided conversation full of exhausted sighs and phrases like, there's no way to solve this now, and you got yourself into this alone, he hung up, and then he looked at us. Does anyone have any more beer? He knew it was going to be a long night. Now, the end of this story was even better than I expected. Because the neighbor didn't leave the police station that night. The police held her for 48 hours, waiting for the judge to decide whether or not she would go free. And in the meantime, the whole town got wind of the story. The news spread faster than wildfire. Everyone was talking about it. The story ran on Facebook, in the neighborhood group, and even on the local radio station. Woman arrested after pulling gun in barbecue fight. When she finally got home, she couldn't even get out of the car properly, because outside her house, the neighbors were gathered, having a barbecue, just for fun. And that's how the woman who tried to ban barbecues became the official neighborhood joke. Don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel for more.